Hello, everybody. This is Kyle Graves, and today I want to talk about patent strategy for large portfolios. This is patent law geared towards big companies, towards companies that do a lot of patent filing, and how this might be different than the conventional information you often read online, where much of the strategy discussion about patents is directed to emerging ventures or to a early startup that's looking to have patent law as part of their strategy initially going to market. So imagine you're sitting on a chest of thousands of patents. Each one is a legal monopoly over some feature, over some part of your product. That sounds powerful, right? But here's the challenge. Every single one of those patents is also a bill. In the United States, you're going to pay 3 maintenance fees over the life of a patent. In many countries, you pay a fee every single year. Now, if you're a large company with a lot of patents, these fees add up. Patents can be expensive to maintain, and an unstructured or undisciplined IP strategy can, when your patent portfolio gets large, turn your corporate crown jewels into dead weight, an albatross hung around your balance sheet. So today, let's talk about how the world's largest companies think about patents, not as individual assets, but as strategic arsenals. As I mentioned, much of the online information about patent strategy is directed to the needs of emerging ventures. But let's talk about not so much of an individual asset-based approach, but a strategic arsenal approach today. Larger companies with larger IP portfolios, often active in many international markets, these companies frequently experience a particular tension. A tension between filing patent applications for everything that's developed, filing these applications everywhere the product is sold, or, on the other hand, a more calculated focus on ROI for the specific feature a patent is directed to protect. So, in many cases, a patent might be filed in 2024, but it may not matter for generating revenue until 2031. It's a long time. In many cases, companies are deliberately letting parts of their patent portfolio die. So, in this discussion, let's explore why. Okay, segment 1, the large portfolio mindset. I'll set the stage for the type of companies we're talking about. When we talk about large patent portfolios, I don't mean a dozen patents. We're talking about global companies, often publicly traded companies with exposure to public markets and presenting attractive targets for patent trolling and other forms of legal warfare that will in time necessitate a prudent defense, drawing you into patent law issues regardless of what your company's philosophy on asserting or defending patent rights may be. Now, for these companies, the patent portfolio isn't a collection of inventions alone. It's infrastructure. This is a balance sheet line item, and if done well, it's a profit center. So, the main difference in these situations from what you might see elsewhere as conventional IP recommendations is that the purpose of your portfolio isn't to protect the product. Very often, the purpose of the portfolio is to create leverage in various business dealings you anticipate entering. So think about it this way. If you're operating in a technology stack, supplying thousands or millions of integrated circuits in a consumer electronics device to the ultimate manufacturer of that device. Now, you're in a licensing negotiation, and the conversation isn't going to be, let me show you this one patent, it covers your product, you have to buy from me. The conversation is going to be, we have 14,000 patents in this space covering our integrated circuits. You have 9,000 covering the consumer product you're manufacturing. We want to be friends because we sell you a lot of units, and you want to be friends because the lead time to source a new vendor is basically the lifespan of one generation of your flagship product. So let's figure out the delta. Let's either write a check, or let's price a license into the supply agreement, or do something else where the business negotiation, and particularly the valuation associated with it, is informed by the patent posture. Now, in that world, volume matters, not because every patent is a masterpiece, but because statistical coverage means something in your portfolio, something somewhere, and you may not have it fully identified or characterized, but something certainly reads on something that they're doing. This is a very important concern for large companies, specifically maintaining enough mass to stay credible. By mass, I mean enough patent portfolio mass to stay credible in a peer-to-peer negotiation, in a supplier or vendor transaction, or in some kind of cross-licensing scenario. In this world, I would argue that there are 7 core pressure points, each of which may differ from the conventional patent advice you've seen, and which relate to the needs of larger enterprises. So point number 1, portfolio maintenance and pruning is going to be important to manage the cost center associated with a lot of patents. As I mentioned, each patent that you keep alive costs money. Annuities in Europe can run to tens of thousands of dollars a year per patent family. Now, if you multiply that over a whole lot of different patents, you're looking at maintenance budgets that could rival the GDP of an island nation. It can be very expensive, particularly in patent families where you filed a large number of continuation applications. So again, your question is not going to be, is this patent valuable? But it's going to be, is this patent more valuable than what we could otherwise be doing with that money, both today but also in a few years? The second pressure point, I would argue, is your freedom to operate posture. Now, large companies ship products globally, and they do so at scale. This means that they're attractive targets for competitors, for non-practicing entities, and for opportunistic patent trolls. The portfolio that you develop of your own IP rights serves as a deterrent. It lets you say, if you sue us, we'll find something in our arsenal that reads on your activities, and we'll counterclaim. It's mutually assured destruction, and it keeps people who may not share your brand values, which I'm sure are much less antagonistic to other players in the market, but some companies or some particular non-practicing entities don't act that way. It keeps them honest. Then third point is your cross-licensing and your standards within particular technology areas. If you're contributing to a technology standard, if you're contributing to, for instance, 5G or Wi-Fi standards or another standard, you need patents that cover what you're contributing. If you miss the opportunity, you'll wind up paying royalties to everybody else setting up the standard instead of collecting them as part of the standards consortium. Moving on to the fourth point. This is my favorite. This is what I spend a lot of my time doing, in fact, in my practice. This is global coordination. Filing in the United States is one thing, but if you need coverage in a lot of different countries, China, Korea, Japan, India, Brazil, each with very different patent laws, different examination standards, different enforcement realities, if that's what you need because of the nature of your company, you're going to need some sophistication as you approach and as you arbitrage the procedural differences between these different places. You'll have to align some aspects of prosecution with where your revenue comes from. And when you're coordinating in this regard, you're bumping into a variety of challenges with procedural matters, priority and disclosure rules, it helps then to have a patent lawyer overseeing the process who operates in these countries and has a lot of good relationships with local counsel there. Your fifth concern is your organizational alignment, particularly in a company with engineers that are spread across multiple divisions, may have their own management structure. How do you make sure the right inventions are the inventions that we're capturing in our patent process? And then relatedly, how do you incentivize disclosure without drowning your patent committee in marginal submissions? Then sixth of all is monetization. Your patent portfolio could very well be a profit center for you that you monetize. And I can think of in particular one public company that's generated over $1 billion annually in licensing revenue at certain points of its life. But when you monetize like this, you're bringing on some risks. You may enable a competitor with your very many and good disclosures. You may create adverse legal precedent within your particular technical domain. And really, you may catalyze difficult institutional misalignments between the stakeholders in your licensing group and in your products roles. So monetization works for some, but for others, it can be a real source of internal disagreement and a potential landmine, depending on what your public relations posture is within your industry. Moving on to the seventh and to the last point I wanted to raise is litigation management. When you're involved in dozens of concurrent proceedings across multiple jurisdictions, you're going to need dedicated infrastructure just to keep track of what's happening. Discovery obligations, claim construction, parallel proceedings. If active enforcement is going to be a part of your strategy, the cost structure of your legal department is about to change significantly. This is going to require long-term institutional alignment on values, even when transient industry press says rude things about your patent enforcement efforts. And that will happen if you become a significant monetizing force within an industry that many people react, particularly, for instance, software industries react negatively to perceived licensing efforts. So as I've mentioned, really none of these considerations apply to a startup. A startup's patent strategy lives in a completely different universe. The goals, the constraints, the decision frameworks all share vocabulary with what large companies do, but little else. So I wanted to emphasize a few of the key differences then in this regard. So for a large company, the purpose of the portfolio is very different. The portfolio is going to exist to deter, it's going to exist to support negotiation, and then ultimately to monetize. Now for a startup, the portfolio exists to signal. It signals to investors that the technology is defensible. It signals to an acquirer that there's something proprietary worth buying. It might never be asserted in the lifetime of the startup, but by existing, it adds zeros to the valuation of the startup. Budget is going to be a big issue. A large company might spend 7 figures a year on a very extensive IP program. Meanwhile, a Series A startup might have a total IP budget of $50,000. This means that for startups, every filing decision is existential. A startup can't broadly file and hope for the best. A startup might file 1 or 2 applications a year and really work on them diligently to cover core innovations, try to get broad claims. That may not be what a large company needs. You may need a volume of good enough patents, not a few very costly and elaborate patents. But as I mentioned before, as you file and get more patents, you're looking at the potential to have recurring revenue, recurring maintenance fee, significant recurring maintenance fees every year. Now, large companies, when they file patents very often like they're buying insurance. They're trying to manage risk, trying to cover generally the surface area of their products, but they accept that many of the individual patents will be lower quality. Startups file like they're buying a piece of capital equipment. They spend a great deal of time focusing on every claim. Every single patent must work well and must work well every day. A large company is going to have a different prosecution approach. A large company may very well accept a narrower claim set to get a patent to grant faster. They're optimizing again for portfolio volume, while a startup will fight the examiner through office action responses, requests for continued examination, appeals, because the breadth of that single patent matters enormously to their value proposition. Then a big company and a startup which is where you see a lot of excitement about patents, they're going to have a very different perspective on the end game. A startup is going to build a portfolio with an end in mind, whether that's an acquisition, an IPO, licensing. Each decision is going to be made with the question, how does this look? How does this look in a data room? Now, for a large company, you're going to manage your portfolio presumably as a going concern and indefinitely. So that is a very different orientation to the life cycle role of any given patent. This patent is going to be with you for a long time, and as your product continues to evolve, the role and importance of any particular patent will need periodically to be reevaluated. So, focusing then, now that we know the differences on large companies and the internal strategy discussions that happen in these companies, you find yourself trying to balance the impulse between filing broadly against the discipline of only pursuing assets that deliver a return on investment. These two impulses, the impulse to file broadly, which militates against discipline to seek protection only for things that have return on investment, they're going to be in tension. And smart people will disagree about where the line should be. The line will become more clear for your particular company as you start having these discussions internally with stakeholders. But the case for each philosophy goes like this. The case for broad filing says that patent value is inherently unpredictable. You don't know today which technology will be the standard in another 10 years. You don't know which product feature will be the one your competitor copies. Filing broadly hedges against that uncertainty. It's expensive, yes, but the cost of not having coverage when you need it can be catastrophic. One uncovered product feature, one gap in your defensive thicket, one misstep in this manner, and you're fending off imitators. You may lack the leverage that you need to counterclaim against a competitor who's just asserted their own patents against you. Turning to the other case, the case for ROI optimization, this case goes like the following. Most patents in a large portfolio will never be asserted, never licensed, and never deter anybody from doing anything. They exist, they cost money, and they die having accomplished nothing. Meanwhile, the maintenance budget consumed by these marginal assets starves the most important filings of the resources that they need. So, query then, wouldn't you rather have a few hundred bulletproof patents than a few thousand mediocre ones? Wouldn't you rather spend money on incrementally iterating a superior product and just let the technology speak for itself? Maybe you don't need so many patents at all. So here's the thing, both sides are right. And this is why a lot of sophisticated companies dodge the question a little bit. They don't choose one side or another, and instead they tier their patent portfolios. They create a tiered approach. So why don't we talk about that tiered approach? They create a portfolio architecture where they divide patent applications or candidates for patent application into a ranked system. Tier 1 includes the crown jewels of the company. This might be 5 to 15% of your portfolio. These are the patents that cover your core revenue generating technology. They get the best prosecution counsel, they get the broadest specifications, they're maintained in every major jurisdiction, they have detailed claim charts prepared whenever you think there might be an infringement issue. And if you ever need to assert them, they're the ones you reach for first. Continuation patent applications are always pending in every jurisdiction that permits it. I would note that Canadian filings are given particular attention due to some unique limitations on continuation strategy there. A lot of time is spent on these very important patent applications. Then you move down to Tier 2. Tier 2 applications give you some strategic coverage. This is your middle layer. They provide freedom to operate protection by virtue of the mutually assured destruction threat. It's kind of a backwards way of looking at freedom to operate, but these give you the ability that should you have a more litigious competitor that then tries to assert rights against you, they allow you opportunities to counterclaim and make the prospect of suing you much more unpleasant. These also provide cross-licensing mass. This cross-licensing mass will backstop commercial dealings or joint ventures. They get competent prosecution. They may have a more narrowly tailored specification that doesn't have as many embodiments. And you then mind the scaling costs associated with certain procedural parts of patent prosecution that are really beyond the scope of today's discussion, but you do mind those costs. You maintain them in key jurisdictions, but not every jurisdiction. And then periodically, you review these and see if some need to be promoted and some need to be demoted, especially when maintenance fees become due. And then the third tier, the last tier, these are your volume assets. You file these relatively cheaply, sometimes as a continuation or divisional of another. You maintain them in a subset of jurisdictions. Most will be abandoned before they expire, especially in the U.S. as maintenance fees become significant around the 11th year. They also are likely to ultimately diverge from the product lines of interest. But occasionally, one will map perfectly to a competitor's new product launch. Sometimes one aligns with a licensing opportunity in a new industry or maybe in a secondary market. And you'll see that the art here is really not in deciding if you're going to be a volume filer or a more ROI-focused filer. The art is in the classification, the tiering of the different applications into different pathways for prosecution. You ought to review these annually. You ought to be willing to kill a patent because technology has moved in a different direction. So if you're an executive trying to determine the right balance for your own company and you appreciate the philosophy I just introduced, you might be wondering about practical implementation. And I think a good first step would be to figure out if your industry tends to lean more toward the case for broad filing or toward the case for ROI optimization. Once you get a subjective sense of what everyone's doing, then you can look at the 4 variables that I previously, I haven't introduced the 4 variables. That's the next thing we need to talk about. You can look at 4 variables that are specific to your own company, and then as you discuss each with your own IP counsel, you're going to reach a consensus position. It'll become self-evident. So considering the 4 variables that might help you decide whether or not you want to lean more towards broad filing or not. 4 variables are industry structure, competitive posture, your portfolio maturity, and then your revenue model. So for industry structure, for instance, in semiconductors and in wireless, where dense cross-licensing is the norm, volume is going to retain outsized value. You need to file a lot. Now, on the other hand, in pharmaceuticals, where you might litigate one patent for years and it protects a billion-dollar drug, quality is everything. You're going to have a different approach. Now, looking at your competitive posture, decide whether you're primarily going to be defending against assertions or these defensive patents, or are you going to go out there and assert them? Are you going to sue people? Are you using them to shut down competitive products that are copying your products? The defensive style portfolios benefit from mass. The offensive style portfolios benefit from strength. Consider your portfolio maturity in particular reference to your product life cycle. If you're still building, if you've entered a new technology domain, if you've moved into a new market, rationally, you'll probably favor breadth of protection within your portfolio. But on the other hand, if your product portfolio is mature, if your market position is well established, you can begin to prune and to optimize, cutting out patents that you know really aren't related to features that are delivering the most value. You can look around and see who you might target as well. This is a good time to start thinking about licensing deals. Maybe there's somebody else out there with a related product, but because yours is particularly mature, they're kind of looking to your product for information on feature sets. You could target them with a licensing demand. You could ask them to pay you some money to stay in the market, or you could sue them and in some instances seek an injunction and have the product changed or removed. This is going to depend in many cases on what that type of behavior would do to your other commercial relationships. Again, it's very, very company specific. And then your revenue model is going to vary depending on whether you run an active licensing program. In that case, you sometimes will need both: volume to cover diverse licensed products, and then quality to survive the inter-parties review challenges that are ultimately going to come. So that's been quite a lot. But as you talk through these, very often the discussion will cohere as different stakeholders say their piece. And then as you begin to cohere how you think your strategy will go, bring in some outside IP counsel, get some insight on what they see other companies doing, some insight on what they see different legal jurisdictions doing when it comes to different technologies and how favorable they are to patents. And then you can make your decision. Run with your decision. It can be updated as you go because we've got a tiered model. You can move products up the tiers or down the tiers depending on what the revenue situation is from year to year. So what I would like to leave you with, talking about large companies and patent strategies for them, is that this conversation, when we are talking about patents at scale, is fundamentally about resource allocation under uncertainty. You're placing bets, you're placing them with money, with litigation risk, with your competitive or public relations consequences on technology futures. And as you're placing these bets on technology futures, you can't really predict what's going to happen. The companies that do this well aren't the ones that file the most patents, and they're not the ones that file the fewest patents. They're the ones that build systems that let them make these bets intelligently, and they achieve a significant degree of internal buy-in with these systems. Everybody who is rowing the boat is rowing it in the same direction. May not be rowing it as fast as the next guy, but they're rowing in the same direction. Then, having built these systems, they're periodically reviewed and they're adjusted. The systems you might think about building include invention disclosure systems, patent filing and maintenance systems, infringer discovery or licensing systems. And again, speaking of outside counsel, in each instance, your counsel should be able to advise you on how to institute the systems. They can participate in your discussions as you develop them. They probably have some best practices from what they've seen others doing. So to wrap up, because each patent is both a cost and a possibility, and because every patent requires decisions that will take focus from another part of your business, in the end, the question isn't whether you have enough patents, but it's whether the patents you do have are the right patents. And by implementing this tiered framework, you can discover the answer and then shape your activities so that the result is that more frequently than not, you do have the right patents.